Welcome back to the Dream Hub podcast, where science and soul meet in the landscape of dreams. I'm your host, Melissa, dream therapist and devoted explorer of the inner worlds. And tonight we're leaning into the shadows for our Halloween special, a journey into the mysterious side of sleep and the wisdom that stirs in the dark. We're peeling back the veil between worlds. That strange time when dreams turn vivid, the night hums with presence, and we can't quite tell what's imagination and what's something else. Joining me is Ryan Hurd, educator, author, dream researcher, and founder of Dream Studies Press. Ryan's work bridges archaeology, ecology, spirituality, and consciousness, the kind of intersections that make the psyche tingle. You might have seen his work featured on NPR, CNN, or Psychology Today, or maybe you've wandered into his online community, the Dream Portal. Well, today we're venturing into the Shadowlands, sleep paralysis, lucid nightmares, and the healing that hides inside of our darkest dreams. Thank you for coming, Ryan. I'm really excited to have you here.
It's really good to be with you today, Melissa.
I've been wanting to have you on for ages, and so it just feels really fitting to have you here just in time for Halloween. And that's usually a time when people say that the veil is thin. So from your perspective, I'm curious, what does that phrase really mean to you?
Oh, it's great. Well, on the thin side, it means, hey, we get to talk about the spooky things. We get to talk about the things that we're usually not allowed to talk about, or we whisper, around campfires. So the veil is thin, right? It's an ancient phrase. It's an ancient phrase that the worlds that comes out of the Celtic lore, but the worlds are blending between the other world and this consensual reality that we share. And I feel it. I feel it so somatically. Actually, I was noticing today because I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the light is, getting shorter. The days are getting shorter, and it happens quickly. Like this, it's not like the seasons don't just turn gradually throughout the year. There's this punctuated equilibrium that happens. It's just like, boom, we fall, right? We really do. And I noticed it this morning when the alarm went off. I was like, oh wow, it's really dark. And there's that grade of spookiness that comes in with this. It's like, here comes the night again. And so it's an invitation to befriend the night and to befriend the darkness. And that is really for me what the core of these liminal times is about.
Perfect. I like that, befriending the darkness and the night. I've noticed that people are both fascinated and terrified by the night, like by ghosts and monsters and, things that go bump in the dark. Why do you think that people are both fascinated and freaked out by it?
It's something that's so odd to me when we think about it because the darkness is the way that we begin our life, and we end our lives that way as well. You'd think that we'd be best buds, but there's something in it there that's disquieting. And I've been rereading Ruben Nyman's book, The Healing Night. It's a beautiful book, and one of the things that he says is how when darkness comes, we have to acknowledge the shadows to emerge, and we have to become comfortable with our own psyches. And I think this is a very well put way of saying that we have to be comfortable with ourselves in the dark and our deep selves, I would add. So it's not just about, oh, I'm comfortable in this moment about who I am in relationship to these people, but all of those sticky existential questions that we may have tend to emerge, right, when we are in disquieting darkness. And so, how do we move from that disquieting place to a fruitful place, to the fruitful darkness, is a question that I always am asking myself because believe me, I have not conquered the dark. It's not really about conquering the dark. Again, it's really about making peace.
Mm. How do you feel like you've been able to make peace, or how has your own relationship with fear changed through the decades of dream work?
Oh, I love dream work for this very reason because it really has tempered my soul and allowed me to become more comfortable in this world. And I was one that had nightmares pretty early on as a child, which is typical. But for me, as a highly sensitive person, they lingered and it affected my daily life, and so I needed extra support for that. I was able to get that, and then in my young adulthood, when lucidity emerged with lucid dreams and whatnot, the nightmares sometimes blended with the lucidity, and that was something I was not prepared for. And but the ability to be in the moment in a dream, to be facing something terrifying, provides us with an opportunity, pretty unprecedented opportunity. It's a time for choice, and it's a time for gathering power. And we do this naturally, right? This is the work of becoming human and becoming more of who we are. Uh, and this is how it happened for me as well. So I'm so grateful for my dreams and for my nightmares, honestly, because I discovered my power through them.
I feel you. I can definitely resonate with that. And I guess using that as an example, I have a dream snippet just the other night. In the dream, I was in a room and I knew that there was like a spirit or something scared, like a scary, not a nice spirit, a scary spirit was out in the hallway. And I was trying to lock the doors, but the lock just wouldn't fit and it kept changing shape. And then in that moment, I realized, oh, this is a dream. And and then I realized that I had the choice. And I ended up, instead of trying to hide from the scary spirit, I opened the door and walked out and it was gone. But it's like in that moment, then I felt like I could push through fear and that I had the option either to run or to face it. And that when I faced it, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as what I was expecting.
Gosh, I mean, and that's the classic scenario where we discover that so much of our intense fear, that anticipation, that when we face something, that 99% of it dissolves. And then there's a kernel of something that stays, right? And it might not have stayed in that particular dream if this were my dream, Melissa, right? Because there'll be another opportunity, right, for this encounter to reemerge. That's the nice thing about nightmares and about encounters is that they do come back, right? We have these repetitive elements and we continue to sort of slowly work with them. But so once we dissolve our fear, we're actually now in a better flow, a better communication with something else, a presence, or some would say an entity, but I'd like to just say, yeah, a presence, a stranger, something, the other, right? The sacred, not me. And what happens next is and can be transformative. And I don't really know how or why because there's no prescriptions for this stuff, right? But that's the roadmap.
Mm, definitely. And then it made me think, well, what am I trying to lock out of my life? What am I trying to run away from instead of facing? And I guess in my waking life, then it gave me a little bit more confidence to face things that I thought might have been scary when they're really not that bad. Do you have a dream that you'd like to share, like a nightmare dream or something where you've been able to face a fear?
Sure, certainly. I can share probably the one to start with would be this one I had when I was probably, gosh, maybe 15 years old or so. And it was a lucid nightmare. And it was a dream in which a monster sort of was seething out of a television set. And so this was actually a kind of a classic motif for me. And so the television set is a portal for something evil, and I thank the movie Poltergeist for that. And so the monster was seething out, and it was tentacly, it was ambiguous, it was, vaguely alien. And of course, my immediate reaction was to run away, to get away. And I began to do so. And then something in me sharpened, and I turned towards it, and I just said, no. That's it. I just was like, no. And it snapped back into that television, and everything went away. And I woke up from that dream immediately and felt just full of energy, just like really just amazingly strong and confident. And I had done that thing, and Nietzsche calls this the sacred no. It's such an important existential step to claiming power is to make a boundary, right? And to clarify a boundary. And no is the first one we are allowed that we make. We make this as children. No is so important. And so saying no in the dream was a step for me. And it was developmentally appropriate. Now, if I would have just throughout my dream life for the rest of my days just said no to the dream, well, that would be sad, right? Because later we want to say yes. But at that point in time, saying no was important.
Yeah, it was teaching you to be able to stand up for yourself and to choose what you engage in your life. Yeah. I wonder if you just kept saying no to the dream all the time, how it would respond back to you anyway, because sometimes they don't respond the way you want them to. It'd
I
start
find
talking
it,
back to you.
well, that's it, right? We talk about this in the dream portal. We were having a conversation about this recently. A dreamer was sharing, like myself, that sometimes when trying to do, say, something lucid in a dream, like a preordained task or an intention, that there'll be a frustration because a character will get in the way and try to confuse me and whatnot. And that is what we call the revolt of the dream, where we're, and that's not particularly healthy. And so in a lucid dream, we want to be on board with what happens. We want to be in congruence with what's going on with peripheral dream figures and treating them with respect. But often beginner lucid dreamers forget this, and they're very single-minded, and this is certainly my story. And so I had dream figures in revolt. And that's what happens is they begin to get quote unquote in the way until I realized, oh, what's in the way is actually what's the most important thing here. And then you turn towards that frustration, you turn towards that that anger or that emotional outburst from a character, and then something else unfolds. And that's that lovely piece that we learn in lucid dreaming, that cognitive flexibility that comes with the territory as we get sort of more adept at it. And so, yeah, like saying no is important, and it's the first step, and then we learn other ways to interact as well.
Yeah. I learned a bit about that from Robert Wagner, and it was about to stop fighting against my dream characters and try to befriend them instead. And yeah, that was really helpful. So
Yeah.
you're really well known as the sleep paralysis guy. I don't know if you know that, but that's I know you about that, and I think it confuses a lot of people, or it can be quite overwhelming and quite scary because it is that in between state between waking and dreaming. So I was wondering if you could explain what's happening in the body and the brain during this state.
Right. And so sleep paralysis, I think of it as a kind of a lucid nightmare. And so under an umbrella term, because it is a lucid, there is a lucidity to it. And it is nightmarish, but it's happening at a different stage of sleep, and there's sort of a hiccup of sleep occurring. And so it's a confusing topic because there's so many components to it, and it's a kind of a very dry medical term that hides all this really interesting stuff like entities and encounter and yeah, supernatural kind of experiences. But the base experience, the sleep paralysis itself, is becoming aware of REM paralysis. And so it happens sort of at the bookends of dreaming sleep. And so we tend to notice it while we're drifting off to sleep or while we're waking up. And different people have sort of different, ways that it's more common for them. And it is common. I mean, I think that the most recent stuff I've seen is that it's about 20% of people in the world have had sleep paralysis for a moment or so, at least once in their life. And what happens is that we notice it because we try to move and we notice that we can't. And so that's the paralysis piece. And the muscle atonia from REM sleep is still active. And so we're sending signals to those muscles, and the muscles are essentially slack. They're not going anywhere. When we don't know what that is extraordinarily frightening. That's the primal existential fear, I think, of sleep paralysis that people encounter. And wonderfully, education helps with this because once you know, oh, that's what this is, then it's very easy to label it as such in the moment because there is, again, this lucidity. It doesn't feel like a dream. It's as if the waking mind is operating, quote unquote, as normal. And so you've got all that normal metacognition and thoughts and fears and dreams and intentions, where you are in space and time in general. I'm in my bedroom, etc. The narrative is all there. The narrative of selfhood is all there. And yet there's something happening that doesn't make sense. And so that's the primary experience. But then it gets weirder because it's sort of this extruded REM state, we're sort of like dreaming with our eyes open. So we're sort of projecting the dream into our bedroom or wherever we happen to be at the time. The most common sensation is this feeling of a sensed presence. So this comes with the paralysis, often at the same moment or immediately afterwards. This sensed presence that something is in the room and it's not me. And it's ambiguous. It's not necessarily malevolent. It's just that I don't know what this is. That kind of like that feeling where you know that someone's looking at you when you're in a crowd and you turn your head and indeed someone is there. Like it's palpable, right? It's not a tiny thing. It's quite strong. So this sensed presence with the fear of not being able to move creates just another level of existential uncertainty. And because we're in REM sleep, our emotionality is heightened. We're very easy to go all the highs and lows of the emotional state because that's what REM sleep, it's what dreaming sleep is about. It's this emotional, right, landscape. And so woo, we go quick. We go quick and it can be very, very terrifying to the level of death anxiety. I think I'm going to die. This thing is going to kill me. And so there's a final kind of layer to this primary experience, and that's when there are hallucinations or visions. I like the term visions. It's more of it's meaningful. And we see or otherwise sense this sensed presence. So rather than just a feeling, we notice their breath or we hear them stepping towards us, or we feel a cold hand on our throat or our chest. And so this is the stuff of nightmares. This is the stuff of, right? This is it. We're in the horror movie. This is the horror movie meme. This is where all this stuff comes from, is this particular experience. Completely victimized. And so it passes, it happens, it passes, it goes away. There's other things that happen, but that's what for most people, that's what that experience is. And then for some, whether they're unlucky or lucky, I can't tell you. But for some, they have longer experiences of sleep paralysis that involve the entity actually interacting with the dreamer, there can be assault, actual, they call it supernatural assault, and there's a long history in all of the religions attributing various entities and demons and whatnot to this encounter, including, I would say, contemporary narratives of alien abduction happen in sleep paralysis. And so we're open to this other, this cosmically, often horrifying other, and yet it is quite palpable, quite quote unquote real. And that's what's, I think, maybe the scariest thing about it, if we can talk about like what fear is being in encounter with another intelligent entity who is hurting me and knows it. That's fear, right? This is the stuff that Stephen King loves to write about. That's what takes us and chills us, and we love to be scared by this stuff when we're safe. When we're in our comfy chair, we love to be scared because then we can flip back. Well, I am actually safe. And sleep paralysis, the veil's too thin, and we aren't safe. It doesn't feel that way, but we do. We wake up. It was quote unquote just a dream, and yet the feeling lingers. And so the feeling for some people can linger for days and weeks. And it does another thing. It kind of creates this rippling effect in one's paradigm of consciousness, right? Like, oh, I live in a world where this happens, you know? That's a
Mm.
lot.
Mm. And what a way to start the day. Even just talking about it, I feel my heart rate increasing. So, yeah, you really get woken up with a strange feeling. Do you think, like, so I've heard that it's, we're paralyzed and then we feel fear, and then our dreaming mind goes, oh, fear, I'll get an image for that, and sort of picks something like an image, or how you say some can be aliens, some could be like a demon, and do you think that it's personally related to what you think fear is?
It's such a good question, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg type question.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of folkloric and dream theory that tries to make sense of this process. And I'll say this, that the encounter is is real and phenomenologically quite robust. And so cross-culturally, people tend to experience the same kind of creature or encounter, although they may look different from one another. And so there's a variability in who shows up, but that the encounter itself has a narrative flow, and that is the thing that causes sleep paralysis researchers to say, is this just culture? Is this just us, as you say, mapping maybe the unconscious? What is fear? What's the scariest thing I know? Onto this ambiguous object. And I think that that's interesting. What David Hufford talks about, and he's really the sleep paralysis researcher. Oh my gosh, look him up on YouTube. He's got some wonderful snippets in lectures. In the 1980s, he talks about, for the first time, the cultural components and bridges the feelings of supernatural assault with the medical sleep paralysis. And he was really the researcher from a medical anthropological perspective who did that. And he concluded that the experience itself is so strong that culture is secondary to it. And he called this the experiential source hypothesis, that this is an encounter, this is how people react to it as if it is real. And the similarities between the cultures are pretty interesting. Now, and it's not, and to sort of flip that a little bit, there's memes, for instance, of like the Hat Man, and other kinds of uh, figures that are seen, quote unquote, all over the world, and that but they're not exactly the same. And it's not, quote unquote, the same person either who shows up, but there is this this solidity to the primary experience. But vampires and werewolves and ghosts and goblins, the succubus, right? So there has sometimes a sexual and erotic angle to it. And that's a whole, I mean, we could just spend an hour talking about that because that's extraordinarily confusing when you're aroused and terrified at the same time, right? I mean, that's why people go on romantic dates to horror movies. They want to be aroused and horrified at the same time in a safe way, in a socially subscribed safe way. Well, here is the primary experience happening. So I don't know. I really do have to say I don't understand what's going on, but the way that I work with it myself is I make some assumptions, and my assumption is that this is an encounter. This quote unquote other has agency. And so I interact as I would with in an I thou relationship, right? And so I respect the ontological existence that this person is in front of me, and I treat them as I would treat myself in a sense that we're sitting down like sharing a cup of tea on a rug, right? And so what does that mean? We listen, we make space, perhaps we make an offering, perhaps we ask for an offering, and we begin to treat it ceremonially in this way. And that's when the encounter itself changes. Because what we're doing in this way, when we treat someone and something in front of us, not as if they were real, but with a deep respect that they are real, what happens? Our fear dissolves as there is a curiosity and a mutual understanding that emerges. Because these things are trying to talk with us. That's why they're humanoid. I mean, talk about how it's robust. Like it's not, sleep paralysis entities aren't usually like a million spiders crawling over your body. It's not that alien. It's a human. It wants to talk. So what does it want to say? What is it trying to tell me? What do I need to listen to? What does it need to express? When I begin turning my mind in those ways, I find that my fear lifts.
Mm, that's great. It's like how you would treat dream characters if they weren't being super friendly to you and understanding that, that they are part of yourself or part of your own psyche, one that you've perhaps been ignoring.
That's it. And it's the way that if we treated all of the entities in our lives like this, that we would probably have an easier go of things.
Yeah. We treated everyone like that. World peace.
Well, and then not that conflict goes away, right? Because there's still, and here we are, and this is the thing about that sacred moment that is so perplexing and disturbing is that we've established that there's an inner subjectivity. We've established there's an encounter. Well, what happens next is not written, right? It's flexible, and I would say that that encounter, that the experience doesn't have to go one way. It could go multiple ways.
Mm.
And it has to do with the courageousness of the dreamer in that moment, as well as just, we have a spectrum of choices, and the spectrum might be different than, say, a dream, but there is a spectrum of choice. And one of those choices is I want out. And so waking oneself up from sleep paralysis is a skill that you can develop. And I was really glad to learn this. And I find it very helpful. And I still do eject sometimes because I just don't have it. I'm like, nope, not today. Eject. And that's okay, right?
So the answer to this question might be an I don't know as well, but I'm going to ask it because it's spooky. Do you think that sleep paralysis is purely neurological, or do you think that it could be something more, something that sort of challenges our understanding of consciousness, that these figures could be something else?
So I don't know. Ta-da! I don't
Ta-da!
know. But as a researcher, I'm always asking these questions. And it comes down to personal belief, and I would say dreamer's choice. And so what sleep paralysis has done for me and has done for many people is has had them transform the concept of what is possible and what is this world made of. Now, the first time I had sleep paralysis, I was 14 years old, and I didn't know what it was. And I thought I was being attacked by a demon because I grew up in a, you know, kind of a Christian culture household, not a religious household, but growing up in the South and in the United States, like it was just like, I'm up to my eyeballs in Baptists. And so yeah, demons, right? Demons. And that's just what I thought. And I escaped it. I escaped it amazingly by focusing on love, by the way. When I was in this encounter with something that was that was evil, I thought about this person that I had a crush on when I was 14 years old, and I thought about her, and that allowed the instance to it all dissolved, it all went away, and that was a very lucky find on my part because that works, as it turns out. And this is what somatic psychologists say is a great way to get out of the experience is think about someone who you esteem or someone that you love or respect. It could be a religious figure or it could be the crush on, your 14-year-old crush. And so it caused a rift, I would say, in my paradigm of, oh, I was more or less an atheist at that point, I think. And that was at 14, the way, the way that you are is like more anarchy than atheism. But that's the way that I thought about things. And this was like, oh, there's a level here that I don't understand. What is this about? And so it planted a question. It planted a question. And as I've gotten into the work and I read others' encounters, there are some very interesting encounters where people learn things that they could not have known. And so there's a psi element to sleep paralysis. It's understated, it's not the main thing going on, but sometimes people learn something that they didn't know or could not have known through, neurology, the way, as you said, or, promissory materialism. Like there's not a mechanism for explaining what happens when someone who's dead comes to you in sleep paralysis and tells you where the locket is.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the coat, in the closet, or whatever, right? Like these are the kind of stories, and there's lots of these kind of encounters. In fact, the Rhine collection, J.B. Rhine, located in Durham, North Carolina, for the Rhine Research Center, half of their stories about ghosts, which they've been collecting since the 1960s, are dreams. And I would say a very healthy chunk of those quote unquote dreams are sleep paralysis encounters. And they are interesting. They are really, really interesting. And there's another component too. And this, again, it just raises a question. And so the question is, who is that showing up and why? Like, why this encounter now? If I were to turn the phrase, the dream work phrase. And there is this ecological or historical or this place-based aspect to who shows up, right? And so it's a little untethered in time, perhaps. It's almost like as if we could say it's the spirit of the place or my relationship to the spirit of this place. You could say it's a metaphor of my relationship to this place. You could go as close or as far to the phenomena as befits your own paradigm, but it is uncanny, and we do learn something from it. And so I think that it is perplexing and it answers no questions, but it gives us more questions to ask, just like all of the more interesting things do in life, in philosophy and in consciousness studies.
Mm. Definitely gives more layers. And I suppose when you come at something scary with a bit of curiosity, it kind of takes off a bit of an edge of the fear.
It does. And that's something that I wrestle with and think about a lot is this, yeah, what happens when we essentially account for our fear and are able to even set it aside and then stay in that moment. And so yeah, so I'm not terrified. I know that I'm not going to actually be ended or assaulted in this case. I know that I'm safe. I know I can escape. I know what the eject button is in this scenario, and so I'm free to engage further. And so we've wiped fear. At least curiosity is greater than fear, and that's a helpful thing to have in mind for curiosity to be greater than our fear. And then what emerges next seems to me it's more naturalistic. It's more communicative. It's more human. And so I've had entities that start off as monsters and end up as humans. They literally there's a de-zombification process that occurs. Often for people, it starts with an ambiguous mist, and then from the mist, this is a time to practice these lucid practices of I'm safe, I'm curious, what's going to happen next, I'm courageous. And out of the mist emerges a figure, and it won't be a monster, it'll be something else. And in truth, there are healing encounters that come out of sleep paralysis as well. There are demigods who show up. There are angelic figures, figures of, white light wearing robes with a healing touch. And so this also emerges out of the encounter. That's something that I wish people talked about more. When we see, say, a mainstream piece that comes up and always does around Halloween, none of that's ever mentioned, right? It's always the spooky, scary, the werewolf or whatever. But no, some people have healing encounters. And there's, of course, look at the history of dream incubation, Asclepius, the Greek traditions of calling dreams. Well, they were calling sleep paralysis. They were calling a hypnagogic encounter with a god. And there's lots of evidence for that interpretation that they weren't just trying to call just a random, any kind of dream. It was a specific kind of dream, a visitation dream. How do you call a visitation dream? You sleep on your back with your head slightly elevated, and you make sure you go to sleep after you've totally screwed up your sleep schedule, right? So you're sleep deprived and you're hyper vigilant, and perhaps you've been meditating or praying or chanting for a long time. You sleep someplace new, you sleep someplace alone. These are all the triggers of sleep paralysis. But the Greek Asclepian, transforms it, makes it a sacred moment. And then the god or his consorts show up and provide a healing touch. And so the dreamer at that point comes with this expectation, oh, I'm in an encounter. This is a sacred encounter, and I'm here to be healed. There's an expectation. I can be healed in this moment. And that's what they're leaning into, right? With this hope and this expectation to be given something. And if, apparently this is what happened. People have been healed in this way. That to me is quite provocative.
Yeah, it makes me want to have sleep paralysis.
This is it. This is the time.
I truly believe like knowledge is power, and I think that everything that you're sharing now is really helpful for those who are listening who do experience sleep paralysis. And, with dreams, how they are belief based, and, what happens in them changes depending on what your expectations are. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. And you also teach about dream calibration and extraordinary dreams. So, for those listening who feel haunted by recurring nightmares, where would you tell them to begin so that they can turn that darkness into something positive or into some insight or creativity?
Yeah, so dream calibration is my way of talking about how to welcome back your dream life from the ground and to put our waking intentions in alignment with, calibrated with what's already coming up in our dream world. And so that is how I recommend going into things. It's like a kind of dream incubation. And so I'll be teaching this. This is the next quarter at the Dream Portal. It's teaching dream calibration as a workshop for my members. And then we'll be moving after we kind of ground in some essential like dream work 101, we'll move into extraordinary dreams, talking about visitation dreams and psi and non-dual dreams and dreams of cosmic intelligence and things of that nature, right? And so the way to get started is just to have this curiosity of relationship and know that when we turn towards our dream life, when we honor them, that our dreams literally clarify. They become more memorable, more understandable. There's this tuning process, and it's real. It really does happen. And so we want to start remembering more dreams. So we start there. And so how do we honor a dream? We start by remembering them and sharing them. And that's always where I start, is because by sharing these stories, it's really about the stories, isn't it? It's the stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe you. I went through that same process and I used to just have nightmares all the time. And I was like, well, why would I want to remember them? They're horrible. Why would I want to write that down? But through that process, you do start to see some wisdom coming through and some great guidance, and they do begin to transform, and the messages become clearer. And then I found from acting on the messages, then the dreams got nicer. They were like, oh, she's listening, let's give her something nice tonight.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And so it's a conversation, right? And so the dream brings this new possibility. We enact these possibilities in our waking life. And then we have a new dream. And we kind of just keep clarifying. And what we're doing is we're waking up our intuitive, creative, limitless mind in the confines of waking life. And that's beautiful, right? That's really the balm to this age of over rationality and to have a grounded sense of intuition at the same time.
Mm. So, speaking of dream stories, can you share? Do you have a personal experience with a dream or a visitation or an eerie sleep paralysis episode, something that might have changed you or changed your understanding of consciousness that you'd like to share with us?
I would, I'll share my healing encounter because that's sort of where we went today. This, I spoke about my first nightmare. I spoke about, or my first lucid nightmare, and I spoke about a little bit about my first sleep paralysis nightmare. And those were both when I was like 14 or 15 years old. This one happened when I was probably 28 or 29 years old. And at this point, I had already finished a first kind of career as an archaeologist and was now back in school studying dream research in California. And it was a blessed time for me. It was a time of just, I had so many mentors, so many guiding lights in the dream work movement were in San Francisco Bay Area at that time. And so I was well resourced. I was just, I was in a very safe place for exploration. And I had a bad day. It started off with a bad day, and I had a really bad social encounter, and my stomach was in knots, and my whole, digestive system was just knotted up, and I had one of those naps where you just sort of like give up and take a nap. It was just like, oh my God, I need to lay down. And I did. I gave up and I took a nap and I fell asleep. and I fell asleep on on my stomach, like, facing down. And I went into a sleep paralysis instance almost immediately. And what happened was I felt the paralysis. I felt a sensed presence. And then simultaneously, I rotated 180 degrees. And so suddenly I was on my back in my felt sense. And a sense presence emerges out of the mists. And I'm terrified because I've had this experience a lot of times at this point, and I'm trying to be brave, and I decide to stick in it and stay with it. And I was curious about what was going to show up. And what emerged was a feminine figure dressed in white, and she laid her hands on me. And she laid her hands where I hurt, on my stomach. And I felt the energy come through. And then it rotated again, and I emerged out of the dream. And the tension was gone. That made a new reality for me, that that was possible. I don't know who or what that was. She hasn't come back. But I really needed it. But what that did for me was it showed me that this is possible, that we can have healing positive encounters that emerge through this landscape. And so the healing component is huge, and I think really unresearched at this point. From the perspective of contemporary dream science, it's well known in indigenous cultures. It's well known, of course, in some of these ancient systems. But for the Western mind to encounter it, we have a lot of unlearning to do.
Mm. Hmm. And sometimes, I don't know, sometimes there's so many different things that can be right at once. So it could be that, you fell asleep, started to fall asleep, and because your muscles relaxed, your rest and digest system came back online, and you've created something visual to match the feeling that you had going on in your body. Or it could have been a real life angel that's come down to help you, and that's been the energy that's helped to shift it. Or, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of different options, and sometimes it could be all of them are right and none of them are wrong. And, it's so hard to pinpoint with dream research about what's actually going on. And especially in an experience like that, it's not like you can go back in time and quickly stick an EEG on your head and figure out what was happening because it's
Right,
past. And
right.
it's hard to time big, strong experiences like that when you are trying
Yeah.
to research what's happening.
And if I did have an EEG on me at the time, what would it tell me that I didn't already know? It would tell me, oh, this encounter happened in REM sleep. Um, Maybe phasic REM, maybe there's some other information there, but it's not going to change the power of the encounter, right? And so, from a practical, lived perspective, how we value this ourselves, it's totally a personal choice. And honestly, it moves into the realm of belief, core beliefs, and faith. Not that faith in itself is something that can't be transformed or changed, but we are in a dialogue with of ourselves with the cosmos. And so, dreamer's choice, honestly, and what I know is that people who have these kinds of experiences, it changes them, it transforms them. They see that the world is a kind of a bigger place with more possibility than they realized, and it changes their behavior, right? It changes their behavior towards the other humans in their lives. And to me, that's the fruit, right? That's the fruit of all this experiences is what happens in our lived reality, and how do we change who we are and how we interact with all the stressors and tensions of modern life. And so I think the science is important. I love doing the science. I applied for a grant just last week for EEG type related stuff. It's part of it, but it's never going to answer the bigger questions. It's just going
Mm,
to describe the material components of these bigger experiences.
I agree. And at the end of the day, if you're having a bad day or you're not feeling well, just goes to show the power in sleep and in dreams. And I always think if I'm not feeling well, I'll just have a nap. But it goes to prove that it is so healing in so many different ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of it. It's just, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, take a nap. I mean, honestly, that I think if the world would be a better place if people just took more naps.
Yeah. Do you have, well, I was going to ask if you have rituals before bed. And I know that you do the lucid talisman. I'm guessing you check in with that during the day. But what are your practices that play in shaping your dream experiences?
Ooh, well, I have a variety of ways I go about it. And of course, I'm not doing these every night because some nights I'm watching Netflix before bed, like a normal person. And sometimes I'm reading before bed. But other nights when I feel the energy rising and I have a question, and there is a feeling, right? There's a feeling sometimes that tonight feels a little bit more magical, and I need to make space for that. Or I could feel or do these things when I'm feeling a little more unsettled than normal. And I'm like, ooh, I need a little more protection tonight. I feel a little unsettled. And so rather than at that moment watching Netflix, instead, what I do is a little aromatherapy, a little quiet reading about something that just enlivens me. Sometimes it's something that I've read before if I want to be comforted, because I love rereading old texts. They say the reader's always different. The text and the reader meet, and it's always different. And last night, for instance, I listened to some doom jazz before bed for 30 minutes as I was doing some reading. I was reading Trisha Hershey's book, Rest is Resistance, last night. That was my protocol, and the protocol for me and last night was just to for rest. And so I have different, just depends what I'm asking for and looking for and needing. And so yeah, the talisman, the dream amulet is something that I found is such an easy way to ground our intentions. Would it be for protection or for curiosity or for a lucid dream, right? Or a question we want answered from a dream. Having a physical object that supports us, that holds the space for us, it's something that we just intuitively get. And so I might spend a little bit of time with that object and perhaps even pray with it in a sense. And set it down. And what's so interesting about these objects, these dream amulets, is that they really do hold the space even when we're sleeping. And so I'll wake up. You know how you stir many times in the night, and I'll stir to flip over or something. I'll feel the amulet. It's the first thing that emerges in my sort of proto consciousness as I come back to the waking world. Like it's there because it's a liminal object. And so it exists in between the dream world and the waking world. And so I love to show people how they can find their own liminal objects. And so it could be you probably already have these. You probably collect them. If you've got a pile of rocks somewhere, you collect liminal objects. You know what I mean? Like find the rock that works for you. And of course, it could as well. It could be a necklace. It could be. I mean, and we know this from the traditions. There's rosary beads. There's other things that work in these sort of ways that focus the mind. And so, yeah, that's what I'll do. And then waking up is just as important, right? How do we wake up? And the most important thing we can do is make a little bit of space for us to be in reverie, to not have to jump out of bed and immediately start packing the kids' lunches and whatnot, but rather to to wake up and say, what did I just experience? Where did I go? Who did I meet? You know, these kind of questions to kind of while we're still laying there, because you know how dreams just slip so fast, but they're in our bodies, and so we notice where they are, and that practice really helps with the recall. And then later I'll record them when I have the chance, or tell my spouse, you know, over breakfast. The kids were sharing dreams this morning when I was doing the dishes, and it was just such a cool scene. It was to think and to see this, you know, this is a part of our life, and so you socialize it. And so that's the process, right? Is to go to sleep mindfully, but to wake up mindfully as well. Two really important pieces.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. If you could give one message to people who are afraid of what happens when the lights go out, what would it be?
It would be that you've seen this before, so you've got this. Everything that we encounter, we've encountered before. We're going to go a little further tonight. That's the invitation. Be a little more curious.
Hmm, that's a good one. Before we wrap up the episode, was there anything else that's on your heart or on your mind that you wanted to share in this episode?
Just that as Halloween is approaching, to for everyone, no matter where you are in the world, just notice the seasons changing, notice notice the moon coming and going, notice when your dreams show up. This is one of those chances, those times where we dream together. In Halloween, it's often talked about darkness and ghosts and goblins, of course, but what's underneath that, right? It's the encounter, the numinous encounter that wants to unfold and wants to enrich us. And so, what does that look like? And so, that's what I see. These seasonal opportunities, these cross-quarter days, is that this is an opportunity to do this work together. And what's so wonderful about Halloween is that for once we've got this ability to talk about our nightmares with others when we usually don't,
Mm.
right? And so there's a little bit more social freedom. So take advantage of that.
For sure. And then comfort yourself with some candy afterwards.
Absolutely. Big Snicker bars for me this year. It's
They're the best. Well, Ryan, that was incredible. Thank you for helping us see the dark, not as danger, but as a doorway. It's been really interesting.
It's been really good to spend time with you today.
Thank you. If you've loved this conversation, you can find Ryan's work at dreamstudies.org or follow him on Instagram at Dream Studies Portal. His new course, Dream Calibration, starts October 23rd, and he's kindly offered Dream Hub listeners 20% off. So I'll link that in the show notes. And if tonight's episode stirred something in you, a memory, a presence, or just a spark of curiosity, don't run from it. Sit with it, let it whisper, because sometimes the scariest dreams are simply the ones that want us to wake up. Until next time, sweet dreams, my friends, and happy Halloween.